All right, let's talk about winches. We got a winch on the quad and a winch on the truck. I'm going to show you some features on the truck winch just because they're easier to see, but I'll show you where to find those same features on the quad. First thing we have on the end of the winch cable is a big hook. Following that, we've got the cable itself that lives on this drum or spool, depending on what you want to call it. We've got these rollers. The purpose of the rollers is so as the cable is coming at an angle, then it doesn't abrade and rub on stuff. Instead, it just rolls around. Going inside, you've got the winch motor over here. You've got the control module on top. And this silver lever there is the clutch. The clutch allows this drum to either free spool or all the gears to engage, and the motor turns the spool. Coming over to the quad, same sort of setup. We've got the hook. In this case, it's got this little gate on the hook that hasn't been broken off because it's nice and new. That keeps the cable from falling out of the hook or the shackle, whatever else you're hooking on. We've got these idler wheels, same as on the truck. We've got the winch motor. And then on the other side, this red thing there, see if I can, there you go, now you can see it. This red thing here is the clutch. You rotate it left or right to allow the winch to free spool. Okay, so ways that winches get screwed up. The number one way that a winch gets screwed up is by not putting the cable on with enough tension. Winches create a lot of force because they're geared quite low. So if this cable isn't spooled on tightly, as it gets wound on tighter and tighter as you're trying to pull yourself out of a mud hole, the cable will sometimes drop between the other wraps and tangle up terribly. This is a really bad thing to find out when you're stuck. How do you avoid that? Well, never put the cable in without tension. The best way to spool your cable in is to apply a little bit of brake. Aim it straight at a solid object. Press the in button and then just drive forwards. Remember, there is a duty cycle, so don't do the whole cable in one go. Give it lots of breaks. The other thing to keep in mind is winches are only meant to be strong in one direction. They're not equally strong going forwards and reverse. That's due to how the gears are shaped. If in doubt, always assume the cable is going to go onto the bottom of the drum, because if you're pulling from the top of the drum, that's got more leverage, you're more likely to break your winch. Always assume the cable is meant to go onto the bottom of the winch. On quads, that's harder to see, and occasionally the winches are mounted upside down. In this case, that's not true. This winch is mounted right side up. They were able to get it to fit. So if for some reason you're winching along with your winch controller that has in and out labeled on it, and the out button is making the cable go in, you got to look at that cable and see if it's bound up. There's a good chance that somebody's put it away incorrectly before you, and you're going to have to take all that cable out, untangle it, put it all back in. And when you're putting it back in, you want it to go on and look something like this. If you look at that, you can see there's about a finger of clearance when the drum's fully spooled up with cable. That means if we put all the cable on one side, it's going to break the housing, it's going to snarl up, it's going to wear out stuff, and you're going to have issues. So make sure the cable is evenly distributed and you're putting the cable on with tension. A bit of winch safety stuff now. First of all, cables are made of small strands of steel. If these break, and they break often as they get kinked and drug around on mud and rocks and wear out, they get sharp. That means you don't want to handle these cables without a big pair of gloves on. The other thing to watch is never do what I'm doing right here. Never let, the cable go through your hand. There's a little sharp spot there, even though this is a brand new cable. Always move your hand on the cable. Never let it slide through because you're going to bleed. Third thing, this hook. You see how I've hooked it? So the tip is up. This is the correct way to do this. If you're doing a trailer, you go like that because as the trailer gets yanked, it'll engage more. We're not looking to do that. What we're worried about is if this hook breaks, we want the force to go down. A hook has a weaker tip than the shank, So if I put the tip in the upward position, as it breaks, it's going to flop down and hopefully hit the ground before it hits me. Speaking of hitting me, anytime you're winching, you can imagine that there's probably a fair bit of force in between the two objects that you're winching together. Do not stand between the two objects you're winching together. Worst case scenario, somebody's going to get killed. They could get killed by a machine suddenly moving forwards. I could dislodge a tree that I'm winching to and have the tree fall towards me. I could have the cable break, and when this cable breaks, there's a lot of stored energy, and you don't want to be in the way of that. The other thing to watch out for when you're winching is overheating the winch. Winches have what's called a duty cycle. That means that they don't want their button, this button right here, held all the time. And you'll be able to hear this. If the winch is working hard, you'll be able to hear it because it's going to be moving slower. If it's moving slower, it could be getting too hot. Give it a break. The general rule of thumb is for every minute that you winch, you want a minute to cool down. It doesn't have to be a minute. Could be 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, depending on what you're winching. Another thing to watch for with cables is not to be stepping over the cable. If this cable comes under tension, that could be because something rolls backwards, or somebody presses a button, or somebody reverses a vehicle. And this cable's going to snap tight really quickly like that, and it'll send you flying. The other thing to watch for is cables on the ground may move dramatically to the side when they come under tension. So you don't want to be anywhere near here. Even if you're not directly in line, you want to be quite a ways off to the side. Safety tip with cables, throw something heavy on there. Clip a pair of planting bags to it, throw a blanket on it, a tarp. That way, if this cable does snap because it's got a kink or a knot or a weak spot, it's going to dampen the effects of the cable snapping and keep it down more at ground level and less at eye level.